Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude. What other names do people hang on me? Your chancellor of cheerfulness, your archduke of Banterbury, or archbishop, depending on where you're coming from. And of course, lest we forget, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, Robert Meyer Burnett here with another episode of Robservations, the show about something. This is Robservations episode number 386. I say these numbers, I'm like, I must be close to death. I have no idea. And of course, I am Robcasting at you from this, the Robservatory. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. You know, in these trying times where no entertainment news is happening, or there's not a whole lot of anything really happening if you're sequestered at home, as you should be. If you look at the numbers in California, I'm very proud of my fellow Californians, and I'm proud of our state and local governments for getting out in front of these things, because our numbers, is, if you can call them that, are good. So congratulations to all of you. I'm actually pretty excited about this show because even though there might not be anything necessarily new to talk about, there's stuff important to talk about in the world of motion pictures, television, and whatever, entertainment, video games, streaming services. You know me, anything you imagination connoisseurs are interested in. It doesn't matter whether it's genre literature, there's something going on, something to share with you. And as you all know, as a independent filmmaker who's been toiling away in Hollywood for over 30 years, I'm always interested in how movies get made, but also how movies don't get made. I know for myself, I've been involved with a number of projects that have been, you think they're going to go, they've been set up, things have gone, you're like, great. Obviously, people know that the sequel to Free Enterprise that I was directing, that I also co-wrote, we had our funding pulled from us 2 days before principal photography began, which, let me tell you, is sad indeed. Well, there's a story that came out today in Deadline that I wanted to share. And there's a number of reasons I wanted to share it, but one is because it is a sad yet a very telling story, and I think illuminating story about how even the best laid plans in Hollywood sometimes don't reach fruition no matter who is involved. So before I get to that, there's a few things that I want to share right off the bat. And of course, today, ladies and gentlemen, today is Rex Manning Day. Today is Rex Manning Day, that's right. And you're probably going to ask yourself, who is Rex Manning? Well, I'm here to tell you. And I'm going to read this Newsweek article that dropped today, because why not? Today is the 15th anniversary, or pardon me, the 25th anniversary of Rex Manning Day. On this faithful day, back in 1995, Rex Manning visited the independent record store Empire Records, much to the employees' indifference, who dubbed it Rex Manning Day. If you're not familiar with the 1995 coming-of-age dramedy Empire Records, all the people celebrating this obscure 80s pipe icon may be surprising. The Alan Moyle-directed film follows the trials and tribulations of a record store employees over the course of a day. Store manager Joe Reeves, played by Anthony LaPaglia, is stressed due to Manning's impending arrival, but also the store's financial woes, which have it on the verge of closing. That day is April 8th. Portrayed by Maxwell Caulfield, the star of Grease 2, Manning is a fictional 80s pop icon due to visit the titular record store to sign autographs to promote his latest album in the film. His latest single is Say No More, Mon Amour, a synth-driven 80s-sounding pop-rock song. The singer is incredibly self-centered despite the heyday where he has the biggest star in the world passing. When Reeves tells him that the employees all love his new album, he responds, "Good for you." In another scene, when a fan tells Manning that he was her favorite singer in high school, Manning asks her a really insecure follow-up question. "Who's your favorite singer now?" Taken aback, she pauses and says, "It's you! It's still you!" Even Manning's manager, Debbie Mazar, has a distaste for her client's music. The store employee's reaction to Manning's visit vary. Corey Mason, Liv Tyler, plans to offer herself to Manning, while Deborah, played by Robin Tunney, declares that she'd rather kill herself than meet Rex Manning. Other employees fantasize about whether Guns N' Roses vocalist Axl Rose would help Manning if he was stranded on the side of a road. Axl would spin the wheel, take aim, pound on the gas, and take that sucker out. Before the singer leaves the store, the employees tell him off, letting him know that not only do they hate his new album and the ones before it, but also his hair looks stupid. To which Manning responds, "Why don't you all just fade away?" Despite Mason's failure to convince Manning to have sex with her, Gina Renee Zellweger does manage to hook up with the washed-up imposter by successfully guessing the color of his underwear. So call out, "Oh, Rexy, you're so sexy," and put on Say No More, Mon Amour, and celebrate Empire Records on the film's 20th anniversary. Well, it's now the 25th anniversary, but there you go. There is the story behind Rex Manning Day, which we're celebrating. And, you know, Alan Moyle also did Pump Up the Volume, if you know that. But what's not, you know, in this day and age, why not celebrate those pop culture milestones that we all have? Well, first of all, to get into what I really wanted to talk about today, as you all know, I love books. I read a lot. I read all the time. Mostly I read a lot of novels. And one of the things that people are always, I guess, I don't know, surprised to find out, I love crime fiction novels. I mean, I like true crime novels. I mean, I guess you can't have a true crime novel. You could have a novel based on a true crime case, but I like novels about crime. And there are authors, there are people that I follow, like just off the top of my head, James Lee Burke, Dave Robichaux, his detective, all set in the parishes in and around New Orleans. Andrew Vaux's Burke novels, I've loved those. But I'm always looking for new authors that I love. And back in 1999, I found a book. I found a book that I don't know, I picked it up. It really is, it's not the book. Sometimes it's just, you see a book cover, and I saw this is actually the actual copy I bought in 1999, which probably speaks to my anal retentive nature, that all of my books have to be like as mint as possible. And if they don't have Broad Arts on them, they should. But this was the book I saw. And I bought this at the Grove. I bought this at the Grove, Barnes & Noble. California Fire and Life by Don Winslow. Now, I didn't know Don Winslow. I was unfamiliar with him. And according to this book, he only had one other book out, The Lifetimes of Bobby Z. But anyway, so I picked this book up. And when I don't know anything about an author, and back then I didn't have a smartphone, so I couldn't consult I couldn't consult anything. I just looked at the book. Well, what you do when you see a new book, you just open it up to the first page, as I am wont to do. And as a matter of fact, now I had my glasses here. There, my cheesy glasses. Let me put my glasses on, because I'm going to be doing a bit of reading, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to put my glasses on, and I would like to read you the first page of California Fire and Life. And this was my first experience with Don Winslow. Here's the first page. Chapter 1. Woman's lying in bed, and the bed's on fire. She doesn't wake up. Flame licks at her thighs like a lover, and she doesn't wake up. Just down the hill, the Pacific pounds on the rocks. California, Fire and Life. Chapter 2. George Scollins doesn't wake up either. Reason for this is that he's lying at the bottom of the stairs with a broken neck. It's easy to see how this might have happened. Scollins' little Laguna Canyon house is a frickin' mess. Tools, wood, furniture, lying all over the place. You can hardly walk across the floor without tripping on something. In addition to the tools, wood, and furniture, you have paint cans, containers of stain, plastic bottles full of turpentine, cleaning rags. This is also the reason the house is a bonfire. Not surprising, really. Not surprising at all. California, Fire and Life. That was the first page. And I'm like, oh, well then, I'm in. So I bought this book. And I instantly became a fan of Don Winslow. One of the interesting things is, at the time I wasn't married yet, but I was dating my ex-wife. And my ex-wife, her father was murdered when she was very little in Russia. Actually, was it Russia, Ukraine, maybe Moscow? And she'd moved over here, and her mother was once a girlfriend of a Russian mobster who was at the time incarcerated in Texas. So I was sort of fascinated by the Russian mob here in America at the time, and this book dealt with that. And I thought it was sort of interesting, and I kind of got to talk to who would be my future mother-in-law about the Russian mafia and sort of found out about how they worked in America. And it was really interesting. And one of the things about there was a sentiment in this book, which was that the Russian mafia kind of figured out that you could make more money doing legitimate business in America. It was easier to rip people off in legitimate businesses than trying to pull insurance scams, for instance. And I thought that was pretty revelatory. So I got that from California Fire and Life. Well, Don Winslow has a new book that's coming out next week, and it is an anthology of novellas called Broken. And if you're a fan of his work, this book brings back a lot of characters and the situations. It refers back to situations throughout what I like to call the Winslow verse, because he does have sort of these connected. Some of his books are connected. And if you're interested, you've heard me mention on this show before what I consider to be the Lord of the Rings of Mexican drug cartel novels. And that would be Don Winslow's 3 books. These are actually in the wrong order, but from right to left, it's The Power of the Dog, The Cartel, and The Border. If you want to read a searing series of books about Mexican drug cartels, that, like all of Winslow's work, it just dripping with originality and searing authenticity. You got to read these books. These books are so good. I can't even tell you. There's no way I could convince you how good these books are. You just have to read them. And again, you know, you'll be a couple of chapters into Power of the Dog, and you'll be like, oh man, you know, you'll stay up all night. Now, for those of you who might think that Don Winslow's name rings a bell if you're not familiar with his novels, one of his books was turned into a novel. Can I speak? One of his novels was turned into a film by Oliver Stone back in 2012, Savages. And in addition to Oliver Stone, Don Winslow co-wrote the screenplay with his partner Shane Salerno. And Shane Salerno started a thing called the Story Factory, where they represent a lot of highly regarded authors, usually that deal with mystery or crime. And they not only represent the authors, but they also broker the deals for movies and television and things like that. And I'm a huge fan of Savages. I don't know how if you guys are, but I thought it was a pretty great adaptation of the book, and Oliver Stone made it. Certainly, it might have been a little over the top. I thought Salma Hayek was great. I loved Benicio del Toro, who was scary as fuck in this, and it was great. Aaron Johnson and Taylor Kitsch in this movie, and of course, Blake Lively is radiant, even though she gets basically hooked on drugs. I love this movie, and one of the things about Don Winslow's work is, I guess it was defined as California noir. And whereas like the Dave Robichaux books by James Lee Burke, and then he wrote another series of books set in Texas and mostly set in New Orleans, the ones that I had read. And then of course the Burke novels that are set in New York City, a lot of Don Winslow's stuff was set here in California, which I really liked. And he's got another series of books, the Dawn Patrol, and it's just, he's got groups of characters that are all in and around Southern California. I just related to them, you know, the same way when I was living in Seattle. I think To Live and Die in L.A., Friedkin's To Live and Die in L.A. made me want to move to California, and not move to Beverly Hills, but like hang out in San Pedro. I mean, I think that Don Winslow's books are a little bit less grungy than that. But you meet fabulous and really interesting people. And one of the more interesting stories and one of my favorite Don Winslow books was a book called The Winter of Frankie Machine that came out in 2006. And basically, it's about a former mafia enforcer that has come to the West Coast to live the quiet life, to basically hide. He runs a tackle shop on a pier, and so he's hiding. And then in this book, he's asked to broker a meeting between some mafia families or something in L.A., and it turns out to be a setup, and somebody's trying to kill him, and you don't know who it is. And when the book came out, apparently both Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro were involved. And they were going to make The Winter of Frankie Machine into a movie. And I was like, my God, I mean, that was perfect casting. I mean, Robert De Niro, I don't know if Don Winslow had Robert De Niro in mind for this. I mean, maybe any one of, half the cast of The Sopranos could have played the character. But when I heard that, I'm like, oh my God, this movie's going to be great. And then it kind of sort of went away. And I was wondering because, the same way that even though The Departed was a remake of the Hong Kong film In Full Affairs, I thought that The Winter of Frankie Machine could be like The Departed in terms of total populist, total popcorn crime thriller mafia movie, but fun. Like The Departed is just, it's a great story, but it's got great casting, but it's a pulp movie. It's great. And I thought The Winter of Frankie Machine would have that kind of feel to it. I was really looking forward to it, but it never happened. And what was really interesting, although I don't believe they ever referred to the book by title, it was apparent when De Niro and Scorsese were on the road promoting The Irishman and various events that they had participated in where they were speaking, they kept referring to this other movie that they were going to make before they made The Irishman. And then they decided to drop that project to make The Irishman instead. And I'm like, what? I was annoyed. I was annoyed by, I was annoyed hearing about this because I'm like, why would you do that? And I Know You Paint Houses, the Frank Sheeran story, whether it was real or not, and a lot of people said it was bunk and whatever, and it kind of really bothered me just because I really like Don Winslow's books. And I think that some of his later stuff, I don't know why. They did a Bosch series. They're now doing The Lincoln Lawyer. Don Winslow's, his books, the Dawn Patrol, the characters in the Dawn Patrol, Boone Daniels, basically a kind of a surfing private investigator. I mean, it is so ripe for an HBO or a streaming series that I really want them to do what I was calling the Winslow verse. Anyway, I'm wondering, whatever happened. I never knew what happened. Well, this week, Don Winslow has been writing columns that have been published by Deadline. And of course, Deadline is the major, industry online site. You go to Deadline, just like you go to Hollywood Reporter, but Deadline usually has the latest entertainment news across a wide variety, wide spectrum of entertainment, whether it's Broadway, movies, television. And so he's been writing these really fascinating columns. Well, today, and because I wanted this movie to get made, and I never knew what happened because I love the book so much, and again, I want Don Winslow's material to get made, and I should flat out, first of all, let me just say right now, yes, Don Winslow's new book, as I said, Broken, does come out next week, and it is an anthology of novellas about all these other characters. I don't know Don Winslow personally. I've never met Don Winslow. But I did start tweeting about him, and then he started tweeting me back, and I tweeted to him, and we've gone back and forth. I've never gone to one of his signings. I was going to go, but I was out of town, and I've never met him. But his last books, The Force, Broken, The Border, and then the Meg Gardner book, which is great, the Story Factory has been sending them to me. But I want to say I'm not doing this because they send me free books. I don't care. People can send me free stuff with all they want, but that doesn't mean I'm going to love them. And as everyone knows, I'm not going to talk about anything on the show unless I really, unless I really love it. Or in the case of Star Trek Picard, not love it. But I really have liked Don Winslow's work. And he just, out of the kindness of his heart, just started sending me his books early, which is awesome. So I have been quite happy that he's done that. And not only that, but it's cool because the books, they go out to whoever's getting review copies, but they do come with press information. And sometimes they come with a letter that he's written. And it's not to me, but it's kind of cool to see how books get promoted because it's something I don't get to see very often. But yeah, so I just want to be, I'm not being paid for the show or anything like that. I just love Don Winslow's work. But today in Deadline, this was fascinating. And I decided to share it because this could be any one of countless projects that never see the light of day. Projects that should see the light of day, but that don't. And I always wanted to know, well, what happened? What happened with the Winter of Frankie Machine? Especially after knowing and hearing both De Niro and Scorsese talk about the project, but not by name. So today, my man Don Winslow, his column is about the Winter of Frankie Machine. And I had to read this. I blame Eric Roth, Frankie, Bobby, Marty, Eric, and me, by Don Winslow. I blame Eric Roth. For what? In 2006, I wrote a novel titled The Winter of Frankie Machine about a retired hitman in San Diego. A few weeks after it came out, I learned that Martin Scorsese wanted to make a film of it with Robert De Niro as Frankie. Scorsese and De Niro? Not too shabby. Not too shabby at all. Like every other sentient being, I revered Godfather 2, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, and on and on. I went to school on Mean Streets, The King of Comedy, and Casino. And now Marty and Bobby were going to make Frankie? I couldn't believe it. The project went on the storied fast track. The writing team of Brian Kopelman and David Levian were hired to do the screenplay. Everyone was excited. One day my phone rang at home and I answered it to hear, "May I speak with Don Winslow, please? This is Robert De Niro." Thinking it was one of my friends jerking my chain, I said, "Yeah, and this is Tinkerbell." It was Robert De Niro. One of the greatest actors in the history of film. Vito Corleone, Travis Bickle, Jake LaMotta, Lefty Rosenthal was calling me at home. We had a great conversation. He said how much he loved the book, the character of Frankie. He asked a lot of smart questions. But I was looking at my watch. At the time, I was volunteering at the local high school directing a play. It was a production day, and I had to get to the school to let the kids in and run the show. Finally, I said, "Mr. De Niro, this has been great, but I have to go." I explained the situation to him, and he couldn't have been more gracious. Told me to tell the kids to break a leg. I did, and was shocked and dismayed that they knew him from Meet the Parents. But I have the distinction to say that I got off a call with Robert De Niro to direct a high school production of Guys and Dolls. The project went forward. I was on the phone with Kopelman and Levian, answering their questions, kicking around ideas. Script was written. If I remember correctly, locations were being scouted. Green light. It was a go. Then Eric Roth stuck his beak in. Now, I like Eric Roth. I've never met him. What I mean is that I really like his work. Who doesn't? I think Munich is one of the best films ever made. And the man who wrote the screenplays for Forrest Gump and The Insider, there's nothing not to like about Eric Roth. Except, to help De Niro research his role for hitman Frankie Machine, Eric Roth sent him a book called You Paint Houses, Don't You? A quite good nonfiction work about a hitman. For research, Bobby. For research, Marty. To make Frankie. But not to like it better and decide to make it instead of Frankie Machine. Elmore Leonard cautioned against using exclamation points. Sorry, Mr. Leonard, but this time I'm using them because I'm yelling. But this is what happened. Messrs. De Niro and Scorsese decided that they liked You Paint Houses, Don't You? Better than The Winter of Frankie Machine. Dropped Frankie and went off to paint houses. They made a film called The Irishman that you may have heard of. I'm not telling tales out of school. The whole crew that eventually made The Irishman did a Netflix documentary about it, so I've had to get phone calls from every friend I ever had. Now, I've not seen the documentary. I guess they finally mentioned it by name. And a few haven't to tell me about it. I really enjoyed those phone calls. Among the people who didn't call me were Marty or Bobby. Kopelman and Levian did, something I've always appreciated. But I'll take the call, guys. No hard feelings. You know the number. And guys, for my part, I have to confess that I haven't brought myself to see The Irishman yet. I should. I will. I understand that it's very good. Of course it is. The director and star are two of the very best. I'll always be proud, sincerely, that you were at one time interested in a book of mine. Now, Eric, we've never met. We'll probably never meet. You strike me as a good guy, but the next time you send research to an actor during doing a character of mine, could you send him the Encyclopedia Britannica, a WikiLeaks article, or a doctoral dissertation, something really dull, something utterly unfilmable? Would you do that for me? To you film lovers, if you go on Netflix and don't see a DVD called The Winter of Frankie Machine, directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro, I blame Eric Roth. I do. Which I loved. By the way, you should go to Deadline this week and read all of Don Winslow's columns. They're all very illuminating and very interesting, and I highly recommend them. But when I was reading this, I couldn't help but get depressed. I mean, I'm kind of thinking along the lines of, with all the COVID-19 business happening, film festivals have been canceled. And I know what it's like to find out that you got into a big festival. South by Southwest, Tribeca. Like I've said, I've got friends that have got into these film festivals. One, Ben David Grabinski, had his first feature film that he had done, and it got into Tribeca. I mean, that's huge. That's a huge honor. And then to find out the festival was scuttled because of current events and that you're not going. I mean, sure, they might put some of these films online, or they might do an online film festival or something like that, but it's not the same thing. And I can't even imagine. So you're like, you're Don Winslow, and Savages, which, by the way, again, Oliver Stone, great cast. He was probably stoked when that happened, but it hadn't happened yet. So you've written a book, and authors, more than anyone, authors who write good books. I know myself, because I've optioned a few novels that I haven't been able to get made. One book I've wanted to make since 1987, which I've optioned. I have the screenplay for, that the author himself wrote, and it's great. And I would still love to make that. So I cling to these dreams. But I know what it's like to be... I've talked to many authors, actually, over the years. Again, authors are the only people whose autographs I collect. So, and they have to sign the book to me. They don't, it's not, no, just don't generic. I'm not going to go sell it. If I have an author sign a book, it's got to be to Bobby, or to Bob or Robert or whatever. And then they have to sign their names. I don't get generic signatures to sell on eBay or no. Whenever I have a book signed, it's for me. But I can't imagine getting a project like this. First of all, The Winter of Frankie Machine is such a cool, it's such a cool title. And when you find out Frankie Machine is a hitman, and I think if memory serves, the name Frankie Machine came from The Man with the Golden Arm. I know it's a book. I think it was a book, but the Frank Sinatra movie that Otto Preminger directed, right? The whole thing is cool. I mean, The Winter of Frankie Machine. It's just such a cool. I just love the idea. It's like Frank Machino, I think is his name. Macchiano, something like, I forget. It's been 2006, man. I can't remember everything, but I just think that would be so cool. And then you think, my God, Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese are making this, which means he got paid. The option money was paid to him. I don't know if they exercised the option. I guess they would have, because Don Winslow got paid. Don got to eat. But, it doesn't matter. Money is fleeting. What you want is your book to get turned into a movie. And you want it to get turned into a movie and have it be great. And when I was reading this story today, I was like, oh, man. and Don's very gracious in his article and all that. And yes, Eric Roth is a great screenwriter. And by the way, kudos to Don Winslow for a little Munich love, because I don't think Spielberg's Munich can get enough love. I think it's one of his finest films, and I could probably watch Munich and Lincoln on a never-ending loop for at least a week before I got tired of either film. But I was reading this, and I was crestfallen comes to mind. Crestfallen is not a real word that you utter out loud. It's one of those great words that you read, but you don't say it aloud. But I was crestfallen as I read this article about the fate of the Winter of Frankie machine. I was so bummed. I'm like, oh man. And then of course, The Irishman, I was on the record. I pinned it. I thought it was going to be the Best Picture winner this year. I really liked The Irishman. And look, the last 45 minutes of The Irishman and where everybody winds up. It's so aging and mortality. It does such a the movie's very poetic at the end. But what it wasn't was fun. I mean, I really enjoyed the movie. But there's one thing about Don Winslow's books that maybe not so much his Cartel trilogy, The Power of the Dog, The Border, and The Cartel and the Border. Those three books, they're great reads, and I don't know if they are fun necessarily, because it kind of gets you depressed, but they're still, I can't recommend those books highly enough. But Winslow's books, more than anything, his writing style, he's got this sort of, I don't know, it's like a pitter-pattery, rapid-fire. His books are just fun to read. His prose is fun. Like when you got to read, if you want to read a book about corrupt cops, this book The Force, read his book, The Force. It's so good. Like, it's one of these books, just the way he writes, you cannot put his books down. I guarantee it. You cannot put his books down. And if you like the movie Savages, he did write a sequel called The Kings of Cool, which I recommend as well. But, yeah, so I'm reading this story and I'm like, oh, because I know what that was like. When we were doing Free Enterprise 2, 2 days before Principal, I was ready to go. We were locked and loaded. And on the Friday before we were going to pick up our equipment, we were going to shoot on the Sunday, we found out our budget wasn't coming. And, I had to call Shatner and tell him that we weren't. And it was like calling my dad. Like I had all F's on my report card or something. And talk about crestfallen. It was not good. So when I was reading this, Winslow's presenting it because, it's water under the bridge, and he's now had other books option. The Force looks like it might get made. Apparently James Mangold was going to direct it at 20th Century Fox, but now with Disney, who knows if that's going to happen, so he can write another article, I guess. But it just bummed me out, man. It bummed me out. And especially now when you've got these series of books like Michael Connelly's stuff getting turned into various series. Don Winslow's had one movie made, so that's a victory, by Oliver Stone with a great cast. But his work belongs on the big screen and the small screen or the streaming screen, whatever screen you're going to watch it on, just not on your phone, please. So when I read this, I was like, wow. But I did want to celebrate the fact that I get as excited about books as I do about movies. Don Winslow is one of those authors that I get really excited about, and I should know better. He's been sending me his books, or the Story Factory's been sending me the books, but I still pre-order them on Amazon, as soon as they go up for pre-order. Kind of like Jonathan Mayberry's Joe Ledger series that I always talk about, same thing. And it's funny, Jonathan Mayberry once, he sent me a galley of one of the Joe Ledger books just because I was randomly tweeting about it. He's like, "Hey man, what's your address?" And the publisher sends me one of his books too. And look, I'm not saying that just if you start tweeting to your favorite author, they're going to start sending you books. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I've been doing it for years. And it's just interesting because you feel, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but when you have an author that speaks to you, and you like reading all of their books, you feel you kind of know them. I guess you feel that way about anything. Filmmakers, I mean, I feel like I know Captain Kirk, he's not even real. But with authors and musicians and things like it, you feel like if you met them, we could bro down. We could throw back a few, and I feel like I could be someone that you could talk to. So like Don Winslow's a dude that I feel like if we ever hung out, he would be a fascinating guy to talk to because his background, he's a very diverse, very interesting background. And I mean, I know his work, and like I wouldn't be like, so Mr. Winslow, where do you get the ideas for your books? From researching real life, but it'd be a great honor. But anyway, this story, man, I read it and was just like, oh, what must that have been like? Can you imagine you're walking around telling your friends, your family, your kids, whatever, and you're like, yeah, Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro are going to make my book into a movie. I mean, that's if you're an author, that's winning the lottery. It does not get better than that. I can't imagine, especially for a book like The Winter of Frankie Machine. That's it, man. You know, there's going through the pearly gates of heaven, and then there is having Scorsese and De Niro make your crime thriller into a movie, and to have it not happen. So I read this today, and I'm like, oh. But, you know, the thing is, there are more stories like Don Winslow's story about the making of The Winter of Frankie Machine than there are victory stories when movies actually get made. And that's something that I think people should remember. You know, not forget that, unfortunately, not everybody gets their film made. And a lot of movies that should be great don't ever see the light of day. And that's too bad, because I can't imagine. Now, I'm not saying The Winter of Frankie Machine is Godfather 2, because it's not. But as a pulp crime character study, it was a lot of fun, and they would have knocked it out of the park. And you know what? Who's to say they can't? Like, you know, why not do it now? Now, what's interesting, when I was looking up stuff to share with you today, I came across something that was pretty interesting. Now I can't find it. But in on the tracking board, this was published back on August 6th, 2015, so 5 years ago. As everyone knows, one of my other favorite directors is, of course, the great William Friedkin, who made both The French Connection and To Live and Die in L.A. To Live and Die in L.A., you know, if there is a Winslow verse and all of his characters, his Southern California characters, were ever brought to light on a series, maybe Frankie Machine could meet Boone Daniels. I mean, who knows? But if there was, I would love it if it crossed over with To Live and Die in L.A., even though that's 35 years old. You'd have to get the rights from Jared Pedovich, but okay, it could be cool. But anyway, so the tracking board had this report. William Friedkin is set to direct an adaptation of Don Winslow's best-selling novel, The Winter of Frankie Machine. Previously set up at Paramount, the project has had a long development history, with both Martin Scorsese and Michael Mann attached to direct at various points, which I didn't know, and Robert De Niro once set to star. The novel centers on retired mobster Frank Masciano, who gets dragged back into the crime underworld when he agrees to help the son of a mob boss, only to realize that he's been set up to be killed. Winslow is in talks to write or co-write the adaptation, and Friedkin will approach financiers once a script is finished. This comes only weeks after Fox optioned Winslow's The Cartel in a reported $6 million deal for the book rights and writing fees, with Leonardo DiCaprio rumored to be pursued to star as DEA agent Art Keller. Ridley Scott is attached to direct off a script from Shane Salerno. Friedkin directed 2012's Killer Joe, which, by the way, if you haven't seen Killer Joe, what are you waiting for? There is the uncut version on Blu-ray, which received rave reviews and helped jumpstart Matthew McConaughey's transition from rom-com star to Oscar-winning actor. He is currently in development. He is currently in development on a television show for To Live and Die in L.A., based on his own adaptation of the Jared Pedovich novel. WGN America gave the pilot a script-to-series commitment in June, which Friedkin will direct and executive produce. Well, even this article is just full of broken dreams now, isn't it? My own, too. To Live and Die in L.A.? Where'd that go? Script-to-series commitment. Apparently not. What a bummer. So that didn't happen either. Neither did Leonardo DiCaprio starring in The Cartel. So, as you can see, what a tangled web Hollywood weaves. it's a bummer, ladies and gentlemen, and kind, gentle beings from all over the place. They don't call it the Boulevard of Broken Dreams for nothing. I got letters today. I don't know, you guys. If I can't imagine you're going to do me as right as you did yesterday with the letters. But first, let me jump over here. And once again, I have to put on my glasses because I don't have to read. Getting old sucks, even though I kind of like it. But I just don't like the fact that my eyesight has changed. And you know what? It didn't just change gradually. It was like one day I woke up and had to wear readers. I don't know. Rule the Obscure. Hang on, let me go to this. Rule the Obscure sends in a tip and says, "Hi, Rob. One of four. I've started reading Brian Greene's Until the End of Time based on the fascinating excerpt you read out on your show. The book is every bit as inspiring as his epic interview on Joe Rogan. Thanks for putting me onto it." In Brian Cox's interview on Joe Rogan in 2015, he plugs his friend Alex Garland's new movie Ex Machina. I wonder if the rolling pen determinism scene in Devs last week is basically recreating the conversations Cox and Garland have when they hang out. There's a quote you read out earlier this year that haunts me. I think it was an inscription found in an Egyptian tomb about mortality. Something like, "Once I stood where you stand, but one day you will be where I am." Do you or any of the Post-Geek Singularity remember? I don't remember that. I don't remember the exact quote. The original source or Robservations episode, I can't seem to find it again. I don't know. I'll look that up. You can also put that quote in. Maybe it'll pop up in Google. The original source or Robservations episode, I can't seem to find it again. If anyone can help, it would be very much appreciated. Anyway, thanks for keeping up your daily broadcasts during lockdown. Keep well and stay safe, everyone. Well, I wouldn't keep doing these broadcasts all day if not for you guys. I mean, you guys, girls, gentle people, kind folks from across the 28 known galaxies. It's great to be here doing this. And, it's nice to have something that I'm excited about. And I wanted, I was actually going to do a show next week on Don Winslow's book wait, lest we forget his new book, The Border, which, by the way, what's funny? I have to say, I loved this. I loved all the stories in it, but I almost think that you need to read. You don't have to have read any of Don Winslow's previous work. I mean, this is actually a pretty great jumping off point because the stories are all kind of different, and you get a taste of. It's kind of like it's like a Winslow buffet. So you really get a taste, and you'll get a sense of whether you dig his material. But it's funny to me because I would think Don Winslow writes. His prose is almost like how a great screenwriter writes. So it's surprising to me that he hasn't written on his own. I mean, Savage's, obviously Shane Salerno has a lot more experience writing screenplays, but I'd love to see him write a script on his own. Probably if he ever gets a Winslow-verse TV series done. And I think I can't understand why nobody would do the Dawn Patrol books. And because they should. You've got a surfing PI in San Diego. I mean, sold. Plus all the crazy cast of characters. It's so good. But I'm just a big fan. But anyway, I don't know the source of that quote. I don't remember. But yeah, for those of you who don't know what Rule the Obscure. By the way, thank you for the generous support of the channel, Rule. That's very nice of you. But Brian Greene is a scientist that was talking about, obviously, physics and time and the universe, and I was very, very taken. And I did read an excerpt from Until the End of Time here. I'm wondering about the Egyptian tomb about mortality. It rings a bell, but I don't remember exactly what it was. I mean, I read so much stuff on the show. I don't know. But I really appreciate, thanks for watching the channel, and I appreciate your support, and I very much appreciate the questions. So that's always great. Willow, of course, is here, and Willow, thank you. You always send in a tip every day, so thank you for that very much. I read your letter yesterday, and you were not here, I don't think, when I read it. Where were you, Willow? I understand why people don't like Borg for making Hugh too wimpy. However, isn't a Star Trek thing to do to present a terrifying, monstrous foe only to reveal there's hope in making peace with them? Kind of like the Gorn in Arena. Ah, way to throw my reference back at me. Yes, Willow, you are absolutely correct about that. And I think that you're right, but I don't. The funny thing about Borg is, remember, the Borg are the meat sacks that the Borg. It isn't even. Everyone's a victim. So to me, an individual Borg who's cut off from the collective is a victimized humanoid life form that had no choice and is trying to figure out. It's not that he's wimpy. He doesn't have the weird disembodied super intelligence to guide him. And I never thought he was wimpy, but I think that was the whole point, is that the Borg, it was the first time, and it isn't really stated explicitly that the Borg are victims in that episode, but it's definitely implicit into what's going on. Like, if you could get Locutus back, if Picard could come back and Locutus is no longer a threat, then the other Borgs should be able to, all drones should be able to be reclaimed. And I think I never felt that way about Hugh personally. I see the Borg, to me, the Borg were so scary when you first saw Q-Who, because it was a disembodied sort of techno virulence. It was a techno plague that had been unleashed on the universe. It wasn't until First Contact where we saw a Borg queen, which I thought was so strange, because the whole idea of getting Picard and creating Locutus was to more easily interface with humanity in the Alpha Quadrant, which was interesting, because you would have thought that the Borg would have come to that conclusion before, but maybe it was because the Borg had never encountered the will of mankind. But I always, again, there's never been no one's ever come up with a explanation for the Borg canonically. There's been certainly Star Trek novels have delved into that, such as Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens, they wrote with William Shatner. The Return gets into that. But I always thought that the Borg it was a mistake. It was an accident. Some society was experimenting with their transhumanism, and they were trying to better themselves, the fusion of biology and technology, and they created this by accident, this horrible, whether it was, instead of Skynet wanting to destroy mankind, Skynet, or like the machines in the Matrix, they decided to use biological forms as their drones. And if you got sucked into this and you were assimilated, it wasn't your fault, and you became a meat sack that was ambulatory for this machine intelligence. So I don't know. I don't think Hugh is too wimpy at all, but I think you're absolutely right that it's the most monstrous creations in Star Trek that you find out aren't so monstrous, and they did that all the time. And I always liked that about Star Trek. I mean, ultimately, one of the things I think that made the Borg so interesting was there was nobody to talk to. It's this, you can't. And once they gave a queen to the Borg, and once they made Locutus their spokesperson, I think they, in a way, sort of demystified the Borg. I really liked the Borg as they were introduced in second season's Q-Who, because I think that was when the Borg were the best and the scariest. Jet Screamer tips and says, we mustn't dwell. No, not today. We can't. Not on Rex Manning Day. And you sent that in before I went on. So you knew Rex Manning Day too. You knew Empire Records as well. I mean, Empire Records is one of those, I think, one of the great cult movies. I don't know if it's as good as, say, Pump Up the Volume or necessarily like High Fidelity, but people who love it, love it. And today is Rex Manning Day. It's April 8th, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, good on you. Rosetta Allen sends in a super chat and says, blessed day, RMB. I hope you are doing well. Well, Rosetta Allen, I am doing well. I am doing well. And I thank you for asking, and thank you for supporting the channel. Let's dive in and see what manner of business you have today. Ooh, our first comes from our man yesterday, Jeffrey Mao. Jeffrey Mao says, hi, Rob. I recently finished watching Betty Blue. and I wanted to give you some of my impressions of it. I'm not going to provide a complete review, just touch on some of the things that you and Elizabeth mentioned during your episode of Elizaviews. Let me stop you right there, Jeffrey. Tonight, Elizaviews episode number 12, where we talk about Federico Fellini's masterpiece, 1960 masterpiece, La Dolce Vita. Or as we would say here, Life is Beautiful. But it's not Life is Beautiful, it's La Dolce Vita. Life is Beautiful is a different movie. Anyway, the main impression that I got was similar to what you guys were discussing. And that is the film has a bit of, fancifulness. I wouldn't say fantasy per se. Much of the events of the film might be the product of Zorg's imagination as opposed to really happening. Though since it's a work of fiction, nothing in the film actually is real, but I think we all kind of get the idea. Much of the evidence centers around Betty herself. Since the film is, I guess, told from Zorg's perspective, as she is never in a scene in the film without him, she might serve as a kind of muse to him, as she essentially gets him his book published. We never learn what the book is about, so it could very well be some kind of semi-autobiographical story where he is the main character and he has a relationship with Betty. It is also not coincidental that as soon as their relationship essentially ends, he gets the call that a publisher has accepted his book. After he comes to accept that she is completely gone and won't recover, he ends it finally. No trace of her remains, so no one could say that he completely made her up. There are some other things that point to the fancifulness of this film. You have Betty, who is the same age as Beatrice Dalle, and turns 20 in the film, having a friend in Lisa, who seems older than she is. It's never mentioned how they are friends, but it doesn't seem likely that they are childhood or school friends. Also, we know nothing about Betty's family, where she is from, or any kind of details of her past, other than that possibly she's a drug abuser. But we also see that Zorg uses drugs also, so maybe there's a connection there in terms of his kind of potential drug-fueled haze creating an imaginary girlfriend for himself. Also, we have the weird yellow Mercedes that Zorg sees in the shop one day, and then all of a sudden it's just sitting outside the piano shop and they just take it, with the owner nowhere in sight and no one asking anything about it. We also have a very weird encounter with the police on the steps of the church after Zorg chases Betty when she freaks out and punches the window. Zorg has blood on his shoes, which suggests she bled a lot, but her hand is barely bloody when they get home. Much of the later drama of the film revolves around Betty thinking she's pregnant. Her fretting about her weight earlier on is an obvious foreshadowing of that. When she shows Zorg her false positive test, which he doubts because she uses an IUD, the lens changes in the next shot. Zorg is preparing to deliver the piano with Bob on the logging truck. I wonder if the lens change was done by Burnett to both capture the size of the truck and the entire frame, but also to symbolize Zorg's wider worldview now he thinks he will be a father. Very interesting. Later, when they go to celebrate in the country, the next bit of fancy occurs when he pulls an already lit birthday cake out of the Mercedes trunk. Sure, like the whole thing wouldn't have gone out or burned down the cake within a few minutes of leaving home. You and Elizabeth did mention the white cat, and I don't know what the significance of the cat is, but just that it does seem to have meaning. Zorg sees the cat when he is inspired to start writing again. By the way, he has some proper darn neat handwriting to write so straight on blank paper, but then it looks like they adopted the cat later on. So definitely a lot of interesting things to take in with Betty Blue, a very French movie, but one that is more accessible than perhaps older examples from the country. I was also taken in by the cinematography, the long opening shot of them making love and the overall color choices, the almost unreal light that came onto the piano shop floor when they went to Eddie's mom's wake was quite amazing. I'm not sure whether you want to read this letter during Robservations or whining about movies. It's up to you. I'm more concerned that the letter actually reaches you, as I'm not sure if my last letter did. Regards, Jeff. Well, listen, I've been getting a lot of letters, and sometimes I skip over some of the letters I get if for whatever reason, but I'll go back and look. This is a great letter, Jeff, and I'm glad that you watch Betty Blue. For those of you who don't know, I do a show with Elizabeth, my girlfriend, called Whining About Movies, where we share a bottle of wine and talk about movies. And the director's cut of Betty Blue, which, by the way, is right here. Here's the Criterion Blu-ray of Betty Blue. There's two versions of Betty Blue. There's a 2-hour version, and the directors preferred Jean-Jacques Benex's 3-hour version that came out in 1991. And Criterion released a spectacular Blu-ray of it. Also, my beloved Second Sight out of the UK that's putting out Dawn of the Dead this year. Oh, I can't wait. They put out a version that has both the theatrical version and the director's cut. I greatly prefer the director's cut because of, as Jeffrey points out, the fanciful nature of the movie. So I think that is, I think it's great. So tune in when we talk about these kinds of movies, and I'm glad people go back and watch them because that's why we do it. So thanks a lot for that, Jeff. I appreciate it. This next letter comes from Sean Camus. I believe Camus, right? Sean Camus. What a great last name to have. Any relation? Greetings and salutations, my viceroy of verisimilitude. Please allow me to begin by expressing my gratitude for all the content you have and continue to produce for us imagination connoisseurs. You're welcome. Thanks for being one. I'd like to talk about respect of canon. As some of our favorite long-running franchises seem to have been led astray, Star Trek, Star Wars, etc., it seems to be a part of a greater trend in the current zeitgeist of storytelling. No longer, for a great deal many people it would seem, are the works and accomplishments of the past held in high regard enough to be considered while working on modern projects or goals. Our precious history of entertainment appears to be belittled, reworked, mangled, and twisted, or outright ignored by the present caregiver of our beloved series. These IPs that many will hold dear are simply used as dangling carrots to get people in the door. All the while, the essence of what originally drew the initial fan base on board is tossed aside for the current Commodore to sail us all wherever virtuous sea is on their mind at the moment. Therein lies the problem. These franchises have, for decades, taught us valuable lessons while staying true to themselves. They focused, or at least attempted to, on the characters and universes which had been established. They didn't simply change personalities or a fundamental law of these fictional worlds to tell us racism or drugs are bad, or to care for the environment, or that women are just as capable as men. The morals and cautionary tales were delivered through character development and interaction bolstered around world building. Now it's all bells and whistles, big explosions, and wonky, out-of-place and or out-of-character fight scenes. They change the way a thing acts or the traits of a character because that's what fits the story that they want to tell. No longer can we expect these property runners to care how a transporter works, or how ships are supposed to transverse through hyperspace. Who cares? We need this person there, and this ship has to be here so we can get to the cool shot in the show and show the film. Stun setting? What's that? Someone has to die, and it's kind of sad. Foundations and rules, character development, and propensity, i.e. canon, help solidify and ground fantastical stories set in majestic worlds. Hopefully, sooner than later, we can get back to established lore with which to mold tales around, not just throwing things at the screen because it's flashy and gets the point across. Peace and long life, Sean. Great letter, Sean. You know, I have a theory, actually. Well, it's not really a theory. I guess it's more of an observation. You know, any creative person wants to create something original, something that's theirs. That's what the whole creative impulse is all about. You have something to say, or you have something to create, and it's not really by choice. I think any creative person would say, you know, it's a lot easier to go through life not wanting to create than it is not only wanting to create, but you have to go out and create. You have to make something. I mean, certainly my life would be easier. I rather than toiling away in relative obscurity in Hollywood for 30 years, I could have gone and done something like, I don't know, been a broker on Wall Street, or worked in PR, or gone into politics or something. It probably would have been a lot easier, but I have to make things. I love cinema, and I love editing. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm making these special features for the Hills Run Red Blu-ray, and what's really interesting is I'm making documentary material about a movie that I produced for a studio, and I'm not doing that now. And I'm actually working on documentaries about a movie that I produced. And it's like, if you ever want to like have a juxtaposition of where your life is at, 12 years ago, I was in Bulgaria producing a low-budget horror film for Warner Brothers, and Joel Silver, who produced Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, was my executive producer. And now I'm sitting in my garage making documentaries about me doing that. I'm literally making documentaries about me and my compatriots making movies 12 years ago, which is what I wanted to always be doing. But since I'm not doing that, I might as well make documentaries about the movie that I made. Now, I'm doing it in support of my film that I produced that's coming out on Blu-ray from Shout Factory. So that's really cool. But still, you know, at least I'm getting to create something. But yes, it is an easier life if you didn't want to create and you were uncreative. At least it would be for me. But I think what happens is when you have creative people, if you're going to take over a franchise, what you want to do is make it your own. The impulse is there. The problem is when you have these franchises, and by the way, there are not many franchises like Star Wars and Star Trek with these worldwide fan bases that will nitpick every little thing you do. Because most creative people think, well, look, I'm getting my opportunity. Different people have put their imprimatur on things over the years, so now is my turn. And I don't really think that they think about, look, if you're getting paid in Hollywood, you take the job. If you have the potential to work on a franchise like Star Trek that could be incredibly lucrative, and you can have comic books and video games and model kits and action figures, and you can get a piece of that cheddar, you're going to take a piece of that cheddar. You're going to get in there and be like, hey, what's up? Give me some of that money. And so you're not going to be like, you know, I just don't think I'm right for this job because I'm not the biggest Star Trek fan in the world and I'm not really aware of canon. Nobody thinks that way. You're like, I'm going to dive right in. If I can bamboozle somebody to write me a big enough check and give me, I mean, Star Trek Discovery is one of the most expensive episodic television series ever produced. I'm sure Picard is too, but a lot of that money probably went to Patrick Stewart. But still, and that's the problem, is that everybody who wants to do things, they want to put their own stamp on it, and that supersedes their desire to have fealty to what came before, unless you're somebody like, you get a guy like Ryan Coogler, like I talked about a million times, that Ryan Coogler does Creed because he's a huge Rocky fan. He watched Rocky movies with his father when his mom was sick. The Rocky franchise meant something to him. He was already a world-class indie filmmaker. He goes to Stallone with this idea and gets to make a film because he loved it. Ryan Coogler did not come up with Creed as a money-making proposition. I guarantee you. Sure, once you're in a position where you're going to get your movie made, got to get paid, G. You got to. And I understand that. I mean, I'm right there with you. Bobby got to eat too. I mean, I get it. I'm not a charity service, but, you know, he did that because he loved it. And I think if Ryan Coogler was paid just enough money to sustain himself while he made that movie, he probably would have done that too. He clearly loved the Rocky franchise, and he created a movie in Creed that both took the franchise further but honored what had come before, indeed giving Sylvester Stallone an Academy Award. How many actors get an Academy Award nomination when they're playing in the sixth sequel to their original movie? You know? And that's incredible. And that was because, if I was a studio executive and I oversaw the Star Trek franchise, I'm like, I will not have anybody working on my franchise unless they are Ryan Coogler, unless they're great filmmakers that love what it is that they're doing, that really know the material, that come in and go, I've lived and breathed Star Trek my whole life. Now, I'm not saying that always is going to come, that's necessarily not always going to work. But I'll tell you, it's going to work better if you're hiring people that are like that than if they're not like that. I would assume. And I would hold up Ryan Coogler as an example for that. And what's interesting, look, there's not one filmmaker on the planet Earth that's not going to want to take a crack at Star Wars, that's interested in Star Wars. There's not. But I would look at their films first and foremost. I don't necessarily think J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies, they would only superficially tell you that he could make good Star Wars films. And I think that, look, Rise of Skywalker is, I didn't like Force Awakens, but Rise of Skywalker is one of the most disappointing films ever made of all time. And I know people are going to say, Rob, you have it in that box right there. I do. Yes, I do, because I'm a completist. But I don't have any desire to ever watch Rise of Skywalker again. There's not one scene in it that I would ever want to watch again. You know, flying stormtroopers, like what? We haven't seen that before. Boba Fett flew in Return of the Jedi. They fly now? Yeah, bro. They've been flying for decades. Where have you been? But anyway, great letter. Thank you. Thank you for writing it, Sean. Delightful. Our boy Brian Eng, or I say Eng. Brian, I know I think back to Jeffrey Mao's video from yesterday, and he even brought you up. I'm saying it wrong. I'm just gonna saying. Can I saying? Brian says, I didn't know about you until 2 years ago when YouTube recommended I watch Collider Heroes DC versus Marvel. You, Schnepp, and Amy broke down DC versus Marvel on the big and small screen decade by decade. It ended in part 7, 2010 to 2014, and part 8 never came. I think it would be awesome if you would finish this series by doing an unofficial part 8, 2014 to 2019. Man, you know what? I don't know if I could do that. Obviously, that was John Schnepp. I could reach out to Amy Dallin. If Amy Dallin would do it, if she would do it with me, I would do it. Because I couldn't, there would be something wrong with that. So what Brian's talking about is, on Collider Heroes, we were breaking down the DC versus Marvel, basically with animation and movies and TV during these time periods. And we broke it. It ended up being longer than we thought, but we never finished because John Schnepp passed away before we could finish the series. So it's not a bad idea. I should reach out to Amy and see. And see what she has to say. Let's see. A few people have been firing more things in here. Let's see. Dirty Nerdy sends in a tip and says, Rule the Obscure is ridiculously wealthy and not too bright, according to Quark. I thought the name was familiar. Laugh out loud. I like that. Yes, according to Quark, he did say that. Rule the Obscure is ridiculously wealthy. I don't know the name of the episode, though. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, so when are you and John going to talk about Amber Heard facing up to 3 years in prison if found guilty of falsifying evidence? She should not be Mara anymore anyways due to admitting to abusing Johnny Depp in court. Jude like Ezra with that video. You know, it's funny. I'm of two minds about this. To be honest, I don't like to get into the personal lives of celebrities outside of what it is they're doing. I mean, as a consumer, as an imagination connoisseur, I love what people make, but no one is perfect. I mean, everybody has issues and has problems. And look, I can't. I don't want to get into those kinds of things, that kind of cancel culture, who did what. I look at it this way. The interpersonal relationships people have, men and women especially, no one really understands what goes on between two people in a relationship. I know, the polyamory people amongst you, I don't mean to discriminate. I'm just saying, let's just say whenever people are in interpersonal relationships with one another, I don't think anybody really understands those relationships aside from the people in those relationships. And relationships can be volatile. And I think what's interesting, though, what you are asking, though, I think there is something here. You know, if she faces 3 years in prison for falsifying evidence, I can't say those kinds of things because I'm not privy to the evidence. I haven't heard anyone's statements. I don't know. All we get is what TMZ reports. So I'm not qualified to make those statements. And Mara, I guess I've read too many stories of whether it's, writers or actors or directors or anybody in the arts. Being in the arts means you have to be a little cracked in the first place. And I can't judge people's private lives against the art that they've made. I can't do that. I mean, I am absolutely, for the most part, unless something is too heinous to forgive, able to disassociate both the actor or the artist and their work. Because I think that there is a madness inherent to any form of art, really, no matter what it is. I don't care if you're a ballerina, to have put up with the kind of pain that you had to force your body to accept and twist your body and to do a plie. I mean, I could never do that. How many years do you have to do before you get good at that? So I can't, I don't know about talking about that. So, I do have something to say like about cancel culture though. I think that people are people, and we have to be a little bit more forgiving, especially if people are in the public eye. You know, like John said yesterday on the show, he said, you can't judge somebody on their worst day. And I think that's true. I think that the idea that the Joker was created in one day and all this, and look, I'm saying that people who perpetrate true evil should be hated, but two actors in a relationship, I mean, just look no further than Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. So I don't know. I just don't think it's something that we should be reporting on. I mean, I like to talk about the results of people's work, you know, whether it's Don Winslow's novels or movies. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the films of Roman Polanski, and his new movie about the Dreyfus Affair, by all accounts, is a fantastic movie. I've grown up watching his films. Now, what he did is indisputable. He did it. He was convicted. There was a lot of shenanigans that happened at the time, and it happened in the early 70s. Even the victim wants to be done, and every time it comes up again, her name gets dragged through the mud, and she gets re-victimized by everybody which I think, you know, there's something to be said for all of that as well. And to get into discussing all these things, I'm not qualified, and nor is it something I would want to really get into. But the whole idea of canceling people and getting rid of people because of one transgression or something, how big is it? That's for the justice system to decide. So it's just something that, while I think you're right in terms of, we've been talking a lot about Ezra Miller's situation, what does Warner Brothers do about Fantastic Beasts 3 and The Flash? I think there's a real problem there. And I think, look, if Ezra Miller, he exercised incredibly poor judgment, and unless he got out in front of it, which he has not, unless he apologizes and explains himself, it puts Warner Brothers in a difficult situation. So, yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough. Yeah. John Ortiz sends in a tip and says, thanks, Rob, for the recommendation of the Joe Ledger series of books. I've read the first 3, and I'm now reading Joe Ledger Special Ops. I spent almost 30 years buying and selling books in New England. I just ordered Power of the Dog. Just saw Free Enterprise. All right. Well, I'm glad you did. I hope you liked it. You're not going to be disappointed in Power of the Dog. You know what? You can't read a Don Winslow book and not be entertained and not have a smile on your face, because his books, man, really, really good. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, will you do a whining episode where neither of you have seen the movie? There must be some quality movies that you haven't seen. If nothing else, there's probably a few great foreign films that you haven't seen as of yet. Oh, yeah. No, we should do that. We should watch movies that we haven't seen. And that's a good idea. We should do an episode of movies that we haven't seen. There's a lot of movies I haven't seen. You know, like I hadn't seen Sound of Music. So I'm sure there's a lot of movies that I haven't seen. So that's actually a really, really good idea. Dancing Dog sends in a tip and says, Robert, can you tell your young audience about the amazing Tetra Sound Studio in New York, the voices behind some of the great Peplum, Spaghetti Westerns, Godzilla films, and Speed Racer, the GRX, the car acrobatic team, the 2-part race around the world? Well, Steve, I'm Snake Oiler of the car acrobatic team. Okay. I'd have to look up. I don't know much about the sound studio in New York, but yes, it was a sound studio in New York that did have a lot of actors that would come in and they dubbed a lot of things. And you've heard their voices on multiple movies and TV shows, and mostly in the 70s and things like that. But yes, Speed Racer, Speed, I can't. The GRX, I love the GRX, love the car acrobatic team and the Mammoth car, and oh, so good. I'll have to look that. You know what? I'll find out more information about that. That's a great idea. What a cool thing to talk about. I like that. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, changing how tech in an established sci-fi world works, like transporters, is like if you're making a Spider-Man movie and change his abilities. Well, you mean between web shooters that are actually manufactured by Peter Parker himself and web shooters that are naturally occurring, which, by the way, I thought was a cool addition. Creators of established franchises are working in someone else's world. Marvel wouldn't accept a flying Spider-Man. Well, here's the thing. I don't necessarily think that something has to be immutable. I really liked the idea that web shooters were naturally occurring, that they were a naturally occurring mutation, because they seemed to go along with what possibly could have happened. If Spider-Man has lots of abilities given to you from a spider, then web spinning, to me, making it a natural result of that mutation, being bitten by a radioactive spider, I thought that was really cool. A lot of people were like, oh my God, you can't do that. But it made logical sense to me, so I bought into it. But I think you're right. I mean, look, the whole point of a transporter, when it was created in the original Star Trek, is to provide a reasonable way for our characters to go from a ship that's orbiting a planet that cannot land down planet side without having to use a miniature shot and how to you have your full scale shuttlecraft model. It was an elegant, great way to come up with getting up and down from the ship. But what Star Trek really did when they did that was they're like, okay, it's line of sight beaming. Like, you can't be in orbit, like a geosynchronous orbit around, say, California, and use the transporter and beam somebody to Russia. The transporter is a very precise, tight beamed thing, and it has rules. And in Star Trek 09, the fact that Scotty could beam them on the Enterprise traveling at warp from a planet that was presumably light years away, they completely destroyed the transporter. Sure, it's fictional technology, but it has to have limits. That's the whole point. It's not magic. They don't care. That to me is one of the most egregious things. All of the changes that J.J. Abrams made to the Star Trek universe, needless changes, to get one shot where Kirk rolls up on a motorcycle to the Enterprise being built. I mean, it's one thing to show a picture on the internet of the Enterprise being built at a shipyard, which was admittedly cool. I've seen that picture before. I'm sure J.J. Abrams saw it and said, let's do that. I think it sort of removes... I like the idea that spaceships, starships in the Star Trek universe are built in orbit. Maybe their component pieces are built on the ground and flown into orbit where they're assembled, because those starships, like the Enterprise, are not made... They're shaped in such a way that they're not meant to be working in the gravity wells of planets. And that is imaginative and cool. I like that. And it bums me out. And I think you're right. I think that creators, when they do that, again, they want to make... Well, I'm going to make the transporter. They don't have any... I don't need to make it believable. I'm going to do whatever I want with the transporter. And you're like, what? That's lame. And yet they do it. And I think that's, as we had in the earlier letter, when people are custodians of a franchise, they should be mindful of these things. And by the way, they should utilize the transporter the same way. Like, here's a creative way to get to and from the planet, and the limitations of the transporter are where story ideas can come from. There's some kind of a malfunction, an ion storm, you transpose with your counterparts in another universe. Maybe wacky, but you know what? They made you believe. Or your crew is stranded because there's a storm on a planet. You can't beam them up and you can't send a shuttlecraft down because of the conditions, and they're stuck there because, the transporter has split Kirk into two. You never know, man. But yeah. I think, let's see. Dan V sends in a tip and says, you've brought these properties up before as far as respecting canon, but Creed and Cobra Kai deliver as continuations. Oh, Dan, they absolutely do. Creed and Cobra Kai are wonderful examples of how to carry on a franchise with respect, because the people that made Cobra Kai, look, can you imagine the people that made Cobra Kai? I don't know the exact backstory, so I could be wrong, but you can't tell me that they love the Karate Kid. You know, they grew up with the Karate Kid. Like, what if we made a Cobra Kai series? You know, it'd be awesome. And clearly, from the first episode, you're like hooked in. Like, oh, the creators of this have totally thought about what's gone on, and they've done something that honors the previous movies, and it's wonderful. And that's the thing. Creed and Cobra Kai are what you need to look. I always forget to bring up Cobra Kai as a wonderful way to continue on how something like this should be done, and why those aren't held up as if you don't love your property as much as Ryan Coogler loved Creed, and the creators of Cobra Kai love Cobra Kai, they shouldn't be doing it. Cobra Kai season 3 will take place in Japan, and Elizabeth Shue has to appear at some point. It just comes down to the writers. Is that true? I mean, that would be amazing. That'd be amazing. Dancing Dog sends in another tip. Robert, may the source be with you. Do you remember Quark, Adam Quark, starring Richard Benjamin? It was short-lived, but pretty funny stuff, as obscure as the Ruddles, but equally funny. Quark was a very short-lived science fiction show that starred Richard Benjamin as the captain of a space garbage truck that had a big mouth that would open. It's pretty funny. I mean, I liked it. I haven't watched it. I mean, I saw it was on, but yes, I used to like Quark. I mean, it was one of the things. It was like, oh my God, a science fiction show. I don't care that it's a sitcom about a space truck driver. I'll watch it. And yeah, that's what I did. That's what I did. Yeah. Dan V sends in a tip and says, I watched Rise of Skywalker for the second time, and Adam Driver only says one word in the last 50 minutes of the movie, which is, ow. Just insane. The only scene I care to watch again is that duel on the Death Star, even though it shouldn't be there with blowing up. But I feel nothing. Oh, I do too. There's nothing in it. There's no great scene. There's no, the great scene in the Emperor in the throne room. I mean, as much as I've said Return of the Jedi really disappointed me, that last scene in the throne room between Luke and Vader is so good. And even though I would have preferred Clive Revel's take on the Emperor from Empire Strikes Back rather than the Snow White Emperor we got with Ian McDiarmid, and now, of course, the Clive Revel Emperor in Empire Strikes Back, if he could be, he was so scary. Yes, we don't have that anymore because it's been replaced. But still, at the end, with Palpatine trying to seduce, look, you want this? Take your Jedi weapon, strike me now. I mean, it's so good. It's so much fun, and there's none of that push-pull. They don't. Again, you can't take the movie seriously knowing Palpatine's back from the dead. No, I don't care what they tell you in the visual dictionary. When you're watching the movie, I'm just like, not only is Palpatine back from the dead, he's got this impossibly huge fleet of Star Destroyers. That makes no sense. None of the movie makes sense when you're watching. You're like, why? I don't buy any of this gobbledygook, and we haven't even seen a story. It's like, we're going to run after this MacGuffin to figure out how to go here. They literally spend half the movie trying to figure out the way. Why wasn't Exegol just far away where it'd take a while to get there? You could have done something. That's why the Duel of the Fates script was so interesting to me, because there was so much more going on in the Star Wars universe. The people of Coruscant, you actually were dealing with a citizens' revolt. I thought that was great. But you're right, Dan. A little disappointing. Dancing Dog says, he sends a tip and says, I'm sipping a beer to the underrated James Brolin. From his 3 appearances on the 66 Batman to lots of ABC movies of the week, Marcus Welby, MD, to Westworld and The Car. Josh is a wonderful actor too, but I grew up watching his dad on TV Weekly. Do not forget James Brolin in the masterpiece that is Peter Hyams' Capricorn 1, and Brenda Vaccaro as his wife, and Sam Waterston, and O.J. Simpson, and Hal Holbrook in one of the great roles of all time. Hal Holbrook gives a 5-minute speech on why they're not going to about getting too much profit in the space program. I understand if it was rerun or just watch it. I forget it. I can't do Hal Holbrook now, but love that. Bob Cole sends in a tip, and he says, there's a bit of savant syndrome in many driven, creative people. A normal personal life is often forfeit. They're just fortunate that the manifestation of their compulsion is marketable or meaningful to others. P.S. Don't forget Darktown Strutters. You're always talking about that, Bob. No, I think you're right. I mean, you want to be a creative person. It can be all consuming. It's funny because, a lot of people think that, and I've told people working on movies, I know that there's a lot of people that think that by getting involved in Hollywood, that, you make movies that you get to lead this glamorous life. You get to go to great parties and you get to hang out on yachts and jet set around the world. And there is there's a certain truth to some of that. But what's really interesting is once you've made a movie, and you could work on a movie for years, the reward is that work. And when you finish a piece of work and you know that it's good, that's your fulfillment. You don't get very much fulfillment afterwards. You want people to see it, certainly. You don't make a movie so people don't watch it. You want people to see your movie. But it's not like every day you walk around with this burst of sunshine up your ass because you've made a movie. I think what's really interesting is that I have a lot of friends that were able to achieve their goal, like myself, of directing a movie. And you go to film festivals and you think, oh, great, I'm a filmmaker now. And because we all grew up with filmmakers that had careers, they'd make movies and they get to make another movie and they get to make another movie. Well, now it doesn't work that way anymore. Movies are so expensive that unless you've made a movie that's really been deemed cool by the critical establishment, like Gareth Edwards, who made, Rogue One. He goes and he makes a really cool movie like Monster, right? And he makes it cheap because he knew how to do his own special effects. Really impressive movie. I really like Monster a lot. And then he immediately is directing Godzilla. Now, no one's going to say no to that. I'm like, oh, would you like to direct the next Godzilla movie? No. Everyone's going to say yes. You jump into that. But you haven't even had a chance to make your career. And then you go from Godzilla to Rogue One. And in both cases, you had somebody come in and pinch hit for you. And where are you at now? Can you get a project off the ground? You really have to manage your career carefully. That's why, Rian Johnson, he went and he made Knives Out, which is something he wrote his own movie and created a new franchise on his own after Last Jedi. And I really admire that. I think it's great, but it's tough. It's hard to be a creative person if you don't find. Movie making to me is very fulfilling. And when you get to take a movie, like in the case of The Hills Run Red, one of the things I'm reminded of is that a project in early form was brought to me and I cultivated it and I developed it, and Dave Parker and I worked on it, and we willed it into being something that it was never going to be. We were going to make a little $350,000 horror film. We ended up making a $4 million horror movie at Warner Brothers with Joel Silver as our executive producer. So that whole experience was great. Now, when the movie came out, it was only a direct-to-video movie, but we did get to take it to the film festivals and go all over the world with it, and it was a victory. Now, a lot of people now would look at me and go, it wasn't really a studio movie. I dated a girl once, and she said, it's not really a studio movie. I'm like, huh. Well, I mean, I did make it for Warner Brothers, and I did go to the Warner Brothers lot to set it up. And when it was screened, it was on. But what she was actually saying to me was, well, it's not a theatrically released Warner Brothers movie. And I'm like, but it was never meant to be that way. It was always going to be a direct-to-video movie that came out from Warner Premiere. And it's just funny that even somebody at the time I was romantically involved with was like, yeah, it's not really a studio movie. And I'm like, but it is. But what they wanted, like many people do, they're like, well, yes, but it didn't get a 3,000 screen release with a $20 million mark. But no, it didn't. But it started out as a $350,000 movie we were going to shoot on this ranch up in Saugus or something, and then it became something else, and we shot it in Bulgaria. So for me, it was an epic win. But now there are other people that sit there and go, come on, man, it is what it is. Well, yeah, it is what it is. Sure, it's not The Ring or it's not The Exorcist, but for what we did, I'm incredibly proud of it. And I feel that way about all the movies I worked on. I worked on this movie, Paradox. It's on Amazon now. It was a very, very ultra low budget movie that was shot in 3 rooms in a hallway and the exterior of where we were shooting. That's it. But it's one of my favorite things I've ever edited. The last 20 minutes of the movie, I'm very proud of what I did on it because I really enjoyed working on it. Now, all the people I know are going to poo-poo it and be like, oh, well, it is what it is. Yeah, but I really like working on it, and I think that I made it better than it was. But you're right. When you are working, Bob, in the creative fields, if you don't enjoy what you're doing and you're doing something because you want the rewards, you'll never get the rewards because, you know what, you're still the same person. Even after you've made a movie, even if you would, I would imagine, even after you've won an Academy Award, the next day you wake up and you think to yourself, I've won an Academy Award. But knowing that, or having an Academy Award, you've been awarded an Academy Award, it doesn't make you feel any different when you wake up in the morning, unless you take some satisfaction from the work that you already did, which is great. Dancing Dog asks, underrated film, The Power, a George Powell production starring George Hamilton. I don't know if I would say The Power. Look, you know me, I love my George Powell. I mean, even Doc Savage. I love my George Powell productions, Conquest of Space, Destination Moon, When Worlds Collide, and my first favorite movie, War of the Worlds. But The Power, it was all right. Another underrated film with George Hamilton is Evil, Even Knievel. It's Viva Knievel, right? With her luscious Sue Lyon. It's Viva Knievel. Isn't it Viva Knievel that he was in? Or no? Was it Viva Knievel that George Hamilton was in? But Sue Lyon, oh yeah, come on, Lolita. And she's almost as yummy as Valerie Prine as Montana Wildhack in Slaughterhouse-5. And you know I love my Slaughterhouse-5, which, by the way, just came out on Blu-ray. That's such a good movie. Paul Gilmore sends in a tip and says, okay, Rob, I finally purchased a 4K TV. What is the quintessential 4K UHD movie to own? Okay, Paul, that's a really good question. If you want to have the quintessential 4K movies, you have to get films, hopefully new transfers, that were actually mastered in 4K. So they're not upscale, which means a lot of the movies, especially the last 20 years that you get on 4K, if the film wasn't mastered at 4K, what you're getting is, my lights went out. What you're getting is an upscale. So you want real 4K remasters. And I would say that some of those 4K remasters that I can recommend, Die Hard, unbelievable. Die Hard has never looked as good on 4K. The Matrix, got to get The Matrix. My lights are flickering. I hope something weird isn't happening, but who knows? I'll deal with it later. The 4K Apocalypse Now that came out is amazing. Things like Angel Heart. So when you go back and you get films that they have to go back and do new film transfers, those are the movies to go get. Like The Matrix is incredible because the Blu-rays were fine, but the filmic quality was sort of missing in the transfer, and they were done a while ago. The new transfers of the Matrix trilogy were great. I think I really like the remaster of Alien that was done that came out last year, and plus it's cheap. And usually I'm most impressed by older transfers. Now remember, there's a lot of people that want everything to look grain-free and look like a Pixar movie. And that's fine too, but that's not what older movies are like. And that's what I really like to see. Because, look, the Marvel movies, unless they're originally mastered in 4K, which a lot of them are not because the visual effects aren't finished in 4K. So the movies are finished at 2K and then you're seeing an upscale. But the things that I've seen that have impressed me, those are the discs. When I first saw The Matrix in Bill Hunt's screening room, I mean it was pretty spectacular. So, and again, I don't know if there's the quintessential movie, but just do some research. By the way, a good place to go is to thedigitalbits.com to find out what the best transfers are, because they do a really good job of archiving and telling you what is what. So check that out. Joseph tipped Picard. Rob, would you mind devoting an episode of Robservations to talk only about the positives of modern Trek? Despite your hate, I know you know there are highlights. Just a thought. Maybe it would break the internet, though. I have to tell you, Joseph, for me, it all comes down to story. And I do think that the new Picard and Discovery, they're obviously, from a technical standpoint, they're great looking shows. But there's very little about them beyond that I can recommend. And I really think that the failing comes from the top. I think the showrunners, or lack thereof, or the sliding sands of the showrunners. Again, I'm always all about authorship, and I don't see a whole lot of authorship. I see the shows as being a patchwork of competing ideas. But that's not a bad idea. I mean, people are like, well, maybe I should say some positive things, but I don't have much positive to say about the Star Trek franchise since 2009. And I have to say, when I go back and watch these movies, to me, I just see a bunch of missed opportunities, and it all stems from the conception, really the writing and the stories. And yeah, it's a bummer. It's a bummer. And I don't know if I don't know if I could. Honestly, I don't know if I'm capable of it. Other than the fact that I want to encourage people. Look, it's been 10 years, 11 years now, and there's people that's the only Star Trek they've seen. I did a show yesterday. Was it yesterday or Monday? I did a show with a kid who contacted me and asked me if I would come on his podcast. And anybody who contacts me to go on their podcasts, I'm usually flattered, and I'll do it. Like I don't have people that you have to go through. I don't have some manager that says, oh, you shouldn't go on that podcast. But I went on this kid's podcast, didn't know him. We had a lovely conversation, and it was all about James Bond. And he, as a 20-year-old, it was new to the franchise. And it was so cool talking to somebody who just got into James Bond movies. And he wanted me on the show, and we had a great conversation for like 2 hours about James Bond movies. When he puts it up, I'll share the link. But he recognizes what's good and what's bad. And he was asking me questions like, look, I understand everybody says that On Her Majesty's Secret Service is supposed to be this great film, but it didn't connect with me at all. I just didn't like it. Can I ask you why you do? And he was smart, he was inquisitive, and he was going back and he was looking at these things, and even he understood that the quality of the Bond franchise runs the gamut. And I find now that I guess that I want to hear from people about why they love modern Star Trek. It's just that the arguments that they're giving me, and there's people that, very articulate people. There's a couple of people I can think of just right off the top of my head, who watch this show and comment, and they always tell me what they're getting out of. They're like, well, I appreciate the whole idea of Picard's sacrifice and going for a friend and Data, and what they're doing is they seem to be telling me what's there, and I get that. I understand, like, all of the things that they're getting out of the show are there. I just think that they're really badly done. Now, I guess it's because I've been studying storytelling for a long time, and movies and television and novels and comics and things like that. And there's the ways to tell great stories cinematically or on television. You can look at examples of them. They're all around us. You can, and like the great movies, we know what they are. I don't think that the people that have been creating new Star Trek since 2009 have done a good job telling the very stories that they're trying to tell. I know what story they're trying to tell. I just think they've done a bad job doing it. And a lot of people don't. You know, if you're new to this world, like let's say you were born in 1985 or 1990, you know, and you started watching Star Trek when you were 19 in college, and you saw Star Trek 09 and you liked it, and that was your first experience with Star Trek, and you have nothing to compare it to. And if you loved it, I can't tell you that you didn't love this, because that was your only experience with Star Trek, the first time you even saw those characters. And if it appealed to you, obviously there is some DNA of Star Trek in there. So I think it's great that you like that. But what's interesting is then I get into conversations with people that like that, or they like certain things, and their perspective on Star Trek is different. Now, I recognize that. I'm willing to concede that yes, you came to Star Trek in a certain time, a certain place, and then I have old school friends that also love modern Star Trek. So I don't want to take that away from people. I don't. I don't. And I'm not saying I'm the final arbiter of what's good and bad when it comes to Star Trek, but at least for me, it's very apparent that it's a shadow. And remember, I'm not some sycophantic, I loved Star Trek up until 2005. No, the first time I really didn't like something in Star Trek was Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. That was the first time Star Trek let me down. All the way back there. So I am not some guy that I just hold Star Trek to a certain level. And remember, I started watching Star Trek when I was 5 years old. So perhaps a lot of my, and also I've also been a documentarian, and I spent 3 years of my life talking to everybody who made Star Trek and listening to people who really are passionate about the franchise and who were really great. When I watch Alex Kurtzman talk about things that are in Star Trek, the guy's just wrong. He just flat out says stuff. And when you watch Major Grin's clips from Star Trek, which he'll show something in modern Star Trek, and then he'll show all of these clips that show why what was said in modern Star Trek is wrong. It's just clear to me that the people that are currently working on Star Trek did not sit down and watch Star Trek, or they didn't watch enough Star Trek, or they gave it a cursory glance. Show your work, as my math teacher would say, and I don't feel that they have. So, but maybe, Joseph, I think what's positive is that people are watching it and it's keeping the Star Trek franchise alive, which I think is great. One day somebody will actually get control of that show. That the problem is, it would be interesting to me if they would open up Star Trek. If Star Trek became really financially viable, I think they should allow filmmakers to come in and do whatever they want, overseen by a certain group, like John Van Citters. Promote him. He knows what's good Star Trek and what isn't. But he has no control over it. But why not let filmmakers take cracks at different visions of what they think Star Trek should be? I think that'd be interesting. I mean, it's not how they do business in Hollywood. But Throg sends in a very nice tip. Thank you, sir. Rob, keep up the great work and find more toilet paper. Oi, wanker. Yeah, I'm running out. Gotta go find some. Hotel anyone, Throg? I love that you keep changing your name. How can we forget Hotel from the 1980s with James Brolin and the beautiful Connie Selica? Oi, wankers. Yeah. BL Alley, who sent me a book of his. Rob, speaking of novels, laugh out loud. I know it feels wrong to discard any book, even one you don't care for, but it's only a copy of an unfinished version. I'm still willing to send a proper placement for your shelf in early May. I'll even autograph it. All right, I'll accept that. But you really want me to throw your book away? It's hard, dude. It's hard. It's hard for me to throw any book away. But if you want me to, if there's a new version, and I'll accept an autograph version too. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard, dude. Dan V sends in a tip and says, is it true that season 3 of Cobra Kai takes place in Japan? They actually shot in Okinawa, where Daniel heads there after what happened in 2. We will see if they got chosen from Karate Kid 2, but I'm excited, especially after the dark ending of season 2. I don't know if it's true. Oh, it is true. Oh, you're saying it is true. Oh, that's badass. How cool is that? Paul Gilmore sends in a tip and says, I just ordered your recommendation of Die Hard 4K on sale at $14.99 and Blade Runner 4K. Oh, Blade Runner 4K is unbelievable. And Blade Runner on sale here tomorrow. It won't be here. It'll be here tomorrow. Can't wait to hear these on my full 5.1 DTS surround sound theater. Dude, both of those discs, those are great, great discs. You will not be disappointed. They both look spectacular. But if you like Blade Runner 2049, that's also a great 4K disc. To Danny, hold your ground. Don't watch Jaws. I back you. Laugh out loud. That was from the letter yesterday. The letter about Bill Butler. I hope Danny, I hope he makes that movie. Oh my God, what a great movie that he could make. Here's a letter from Caleb Stone, who just says, how or where do I send a video letter? Well, you send it to the Burnettwork website. Send me a video letter to the burnettwork.net. It'll go in. Michael put it in a Dropbox, and I will download it. And or if you want to send me a video letter too, You can put it as a private link on YouTube and send me a YouTube link, and I'll download it. Or I do have a professional Vimeo account. You can upload it to Vimeo and make sure send me a letter where it is, and I can download it from there if that's the easiest way to do it. However you want to do it. So thanks for asking. I can't wait. Our man Stubble McShave has a letter, another letter. Greetings to the specialist of speculative speculation and the master of fun and wonder. The specialist of speculative speculation. I love that. Unlike the other letters you get sent in, mine will focus on Star Trek. The first Trek I remember seeing was the original series. I didn't watch every episode at first, but rather caught some of them on TV in the mid-1980s, when I was 8 or 9 years old. I didn't look up to see when they aired and stay up for it. Instead, I'd check it out if it was on when I was up watching TV. I thought it was decent, although some of it seemed a bit dated. When The Next Generation first aired, I was the perfect age to watch it. As someone born in 1977, I was between 10 and 17 years old when it had its first run on TV. I was a big fan of the series and never missed an episode. I thought the first seasons were a bit hit and miss, to say the least. The later seasons were really good, and most of the last season was not so good. Later, I learned that it was probably due to the writers who were spread too thin. DS9 was in the middle of its run, Generations was being made, and they were prepping for Voyager at the same time as the final season of TNG. After that, it took a couple of years before I returned to Star Trek. A friend of mine had gotten the DS9 DVD set and asked me if I wanted to watch it. I remember having watched a few episodes here and there of DS9, and it hadn't connected with me. I didn't relate to the characters because some of them were so different from what I watched in earlier Star Trek. I agreed to watch it, and I must say, to this day, it's by far the best Star Trek series, in my opinion. I think it's the best since the original. But it took a while to get there, in a different way than Next Generation did. I thought that I'd try and explain why I think it's the best series. DS9 dared to do something new. The writers of the series forewent the typical Starship story of going places and exploring new worlds. They decided to place the story at home and have the adventures come to them. It made the scope of the Star Trek universe bigger. By placing the stories in largely one place, they got a lot of recurring characters and were able to explore those characters in a way that other Star Trek series hadn't done. In other Star Trek series, there was often no more than a few episodes about another race of people. In DS9, we got representatives from different alien races and could explore their way of thinking and philosophies for several years, making the world so much richer. It actually follows Sanderson's third law of magic, which is actually a storytelling law. By digging deep in a given number of cultures and philosophies, the world got much richer than if we examined a new type of culture each episode. I agree with that. On the Enterprise, every character followed the Prime Directive and everyone wore the same uniform. In DS9, we got Starfleet trying to follow the philosophies that it had held so sacred, but we also got the philosophies and ideologies of Klingons, Bajorans, Ferengi, Cardassians, and those of the Dominion. DS9 went beyond Star Trek while still keeping true to Star Trek. Well put, sir. It examined other cultures in substantial ways rather than just examine a small portion of a given alien philosophy for one episode of television. It also was able to combine the values and scientific mindset of Starfleet with the religious elements of the Bajoran faith. This was most evident for Kira and later for Sisko. In DS9, the Prime Directive clashed with the Ferengi rules of acquisition, which in turn clashed with the word of the prophets, which clashed with the rising of the Dominion, which clashed with Klingon honor, which clashed with Cardassian nationalism and fascism. The tone of DS9 was a little darker than the other Star Trek shows. We had just left the backdrop of a Cardassian Nazi-like occupation of Bajor, and ahead of us waited the Dominion War, which defined the Alpha and Gamma Quadrant for several years. Although beset with this hardship, the Starfleet characters never broke their ideal philosophy, although it was stretched on occasion. I want to point out that you just nailed exactly why I like the show, and everyone's like, DS9 is so far away from Gene Roddenberry's original ethos, I mean, how can you like that show? Well, as you just pointed out, it really isn't. It's just that when you're watching the original Star Trek series, we're only hanging out with Federation peoples. When we're watching DS9, what do you do when your Federation is intermixing with all different kinds of people and philosophies, and you're not just dealing with the utopian Federation? And I don't understand why that's so difficult for people to understand. And now, when you're dealing with all of these cultures and you're only one of them, you're almost back to square one, where then you have to figure out, how do we all understand each other? How do we all work together? And that's what was so interesting about Deep Space Nine. And it was interesting watching our Federation members, our characters, our Starfleet characters, hang on to those utopian ideals in the face of all of this craziness. And that's why I think it absolutely upheld Roddenberry's ideals of what Star Trek was all about. And I think it's a complete misreading of the show when people go, well, what about the time when Sisko allowed a Romulan? Look, the whole point was that how are you out on the frontier, which is basically what Deep Space Nine was. You're out on the frontier. It's a frontier. It's a lawless frontier that you ventured out into. And you're still you, but how do you maintain those ideals? And the fact that when millions, presumably billions of people could perish in the Dominion War, and if there was a way to dupe the Romulans in to get into this war to stop, prevent the do you do it? And at the end of that episode, do you think Sisko's happy he did it? No. Like we've talked about on the show, will haunt him. The ending and his decision in the pale moonlight will haunt him forever. And I think that's very apparent by the end of that episode. And I think it's nuanced, and I find it difficult to deal with people like, it's so different from Roddenberry's ethos. It's absolutely not. It's just put our Roddenberry characters, the philosophy of Star Trek, in a different situation than we've seen them before, where they're coming up and butting heads and clashing against all of these other philosophies that aren't the Utopian Federation. And that's why the show is great. The cast in DS9 are some of the most diverse and fascinating, with Bajorans, Trills, Ferengi, Cardassians, Klingons, shape-shifting characters. Their background was interesting and very different from one another. Quark was a sneaky Ferengi bartender who was always trying to make some extra money by questionable means and always getting into trouble because of it. The Ferengi were often the comic relief, but the Ferengi episodes also had several serious dramatic moments. They at times highlighted some social issues by how their society treated workers and women. The episodes that featured Quark's mother often dealt with these issues. Quark's brother Rom and his nephew Nog were characters that they didn't really know what to do with in the first seasons, but in later seasons they had great character arcs and great character moments, absolutely. Kira was a former resistance fighter or terrorist from Bajor who'd been fighting against the Cardassian occupation. She had to find her place as a representative of the Bajoran government on the space station. She started out as a fierce fighter with little patience, but over the seasons she explored some of her tender side with several romances. Dax was a symbiote who had lived 7 lifetimes in different bodies. She started out as a science officer, but explored more of a warrior side when Michael Dorn joined the cast as Worf. Terry Farrell, who played Jadzia Dax, was not the strongest actor in the beginning, but she became much better as the seasons went on. I totally agree with you. Odo was the security officer who was always grumpy and had the ability to morph into more or less any object or creature. He had a great character arc, and his backstory became essential to the latter part of the series. Garrick was an exiled Cardassian tailor. Sometimes, however, it seemed he knew a lot more about clandestine operations than most people. His past seemed to have been afflicted with both violence and a history of circumventing the law to get what he needed. Worf joined the show after TNG ended. The subjects around duty and loyalty to his Klingon heritage was further explored in Deep Space Nine. He always walked a tightrope between Starfleet duty and Klingon honor. There was, of course, a lot of other characters, and they were all interesting. The human Starfleet characters, Sisko, Bashir, and O'Brien, were great. The friendship which develops between Bashir and O'Brien is one of the best buddy relationships ever. They clearly didn't like each other in the beginning, but after having a drunken evening where they sang old traditional British songs, they bonded as friends and would often be found leaving the holosuites after having fought in an air war against the Germans. Sisko was a widowed father trying to raise his son Jake at the same time that he was the commander of a space station in a frontier territory. In a time when black people were seldom cast in big roles in film and television, he was portrayed as just another father trying his best to raise his son, do his duty, and set a good example for his crew on the station. Another thing about Deep Space Nine, which some of the best representation ever in science fiction, much less sci-fi TV, and nowadays, they have to put that front and center. Deep Space Nine did it way better. And they didn't have to get patted on the back for it. There are a ton of secondary and returning tertiary characters that should be mentioned, but this letter has gone on too long already. I'll give a shout out to Gul Dukat, Morn, Damar, Keiko O'Brien, Cassidy Yates, Kai Wynn, and all the characters that Jeffrey Combs played. Not to mention, come on, Sean Phillips. Salome Jens is the leader of the founders, and of course Jeffrey Combs as Weyoun. To me, the Star Trek series is the best of them all. Oh, I think the cast of DS9 is clearly the strongest of all Star Trek series. I agree. Whilst TNG had a few characters with interesting character arcs, DS9 had a dozen interesting characters who evolved during the show's run. To me, the Star Trek series is the best of them all. Yes, the first couple of seasons are a bit hit and miss, but the later two-thirds of the show is some of the best ever produced. I agree. I'll end by mentioning a few episodes that you can watch as standalone episodes without any need for deep knowledge of the series. Rob, feel free to comment on any of them. Emissary and Duet, which is a penultimate episode of Season 1. Both are amazing. I think Emissary is the best of the modern Trek pilots. I think it's great science fiction and it's great character study. I also would add In the Hands of the Prophets, which is the last episode of the first season, to that. Second season, The Homecoming, The Circle, and The Siege. Those are the opening 3 episodes dealing with Bajoran politics. Great stuff. Really like it. Third season, House of Quark, Defiant, and Explorers. All of these are great episodes. The fourth season has The Visitor, Little Green Men, Our Man Bashir, and Body Parts. I think the Visitor, Little Green Men, and Our Man Bashir are also sort of off-brand stories. They're great one-shot stories. Fifth season, Nor to Battle the Strong and Trials and Tribulations. Again, Trials and Tribulations is kind of a one-shot. And the sixth season of Deep Space Nine, to my mind, is it's the strongest season of any modern Star Trek show since the original. You're Cordially Invited and Far Beyond the Stars. Again, those one-off shows are great. But you know what? I would say things like one of the most shocking things I've ever seen on sci-fi TV is when you realize what's going on in Purgatory's Shadow and By Inferno's Light, that 2-parter. You're like, wait, what? That's when that's when you really realize the stakes of what's going on, and it's pretty great. Seventh season with Treachery, Faith, and the Great River, and It's Only a Paper Moon. It's Only a Paper Moon is one of the finest episodes of the show. But to me, the 4th through 7th season of Deep Space Nine is just the best. There are many other great episodes, but they deal with the Dominion War or other things that's part of a previous storyline. Oh, okay, so you were going after those episodes. Yeah. So, yes, your standalone episodes, and that's another thing. You had this great ongoing arc, but you also had great standalone episodes. So, it's great. Stay safe, Stubble. Here's a montage video of YouTube clips of Garrick the Tailor. It's set to the music of Secret Agent Man by Johnny Rivers. I don't know if I've ever seen this, but I will put it into the live chat for you. Here it is. Garrick was such a great character because he's got these great attachments to the intelligence services. Bunyan Snipe says, Viva Knievel starred Evel Knievel himself. Ah, yes. Okay, so I guess it was Evel Knievel that starred that George Hamilton. Yeah, that's right. Viva Knievel did. Anonymous sends in somebody anonymous sent in a nice tip. Hi Rob, I love your shows, especially when you go, really? Can you please tell me where the 28 known galaxies phrase is from? I believe it's from Superman, the movie, the 28 known galaxies, right? I could be wrong, but hang on, let me check. I think it is, and if I'm saying it, I could be wrong because I can't know everything. Hang on. The 28, no, I think it's what Jarrell says, right? Isn't it? At least I used to think it was. 28 known. Yeah, it popped up. 28 known. Yep. 28 known galaxies. What are they? That's what Jarrell does say in Superman the movie. So that's why I got it from. So now you know. Now you know. The Bunk sends in a tip and says, loved your discussion on canon a few days ago, and I agree with everything you said. Did you see Matt Martin's Star Wars Story Group tweet supporting the IO9 article? Will Disney ever come around to the critiques from fans regarding their ignorance of canon? I don't know. I don't think they particularly care. See, the whole idea of canon... The problem is, at the studio level, when you start talking to them about canon, they don't know what they don't know what you're talking about. They really don't. They understand what fans are, and they understand why you get into these things, but they don't really get it. I don't think they really understand it, and certainly the custodians of Star Trek don't, because they want to come in and make it their own. They don't. What do they care? And then they don't understand why. See, here's what people don't understand about a lot of fandom, and especially Hollywood suits don't. If you went to an Ivy League business school and you got a business degree and you're working at the studio level, if you didn't grow up a fan, you're not going to understand this. But modern fandom, whether you like Dungeons and Dragons, whether you like Harry Potter, whatever you're interested in, there is a rich lore that comes along with all these things. Part of my Star Trek fandom came out of the fact that I bought reference books. I have encyclopedias. I've got a Star Wars, Steve Sansweet Star Wars encyclopedia. I mean, all of this lore exists, and it's part of the reason you become fans of these things. If you're a kid, you buy these things, you look at them, they're a part of you. And we know, like, there's even rules to Harry Potter's magic. There's rules to Quidditch. If somebody were to come in and change Quidditch somehow and turn it into a totally different game, or what is it, the snitch or whatever the thing, you didn't need any of that stuff, and then people would get pissed. It's just that what I find really interesting is that nowadays, I believe, and again, I can't prove this, but people are like, Star Trek has been around for 54 years now. It's old. It's ripe for reinvention. We don't have to be, what they'd said in the 60s doesn't matter anymore. But if you're a Star Trek fan and you're an older Star Trek fan, one of the appeals of Star Trek was always, how did they incorporate this whole universe? And yes, there's a lot of contradictory material. But for the most part, even with the Klingon ridges and non-ridges, they went in and tried to explain it in Enterprise. But that lore and the universe is all part of it. Anyone who's a Tolkien fan can tell you that. And now we have, look, if you want to reboot Star Trek, I'm all for it. I even wrote a Tumblr. The one time I spent any time on Tumblr, I wrote an article in Tumblr going, why not just reboot Star Trek from the ground up? Like, if Kurtzman and company had come along and said, you know what? We're not going to make canonical Star Trek. We're not. But this idea that they're not making canonical Star Trek, and yet they're saying, well, we did. Well, none of it makes any sense. There's nothing canonical. Nothing. Not one thing that's canonical about modern Star Trek. And they keep telling us that it is, but it's not. It's not a visual reboot. It has no bearing on what Star Trek is. Everything about it is different. So if they just said, we're doing a reboot from the beginning, from the ground up, total reboot, I would have been great. Then I don't have to sit there and worry about it. But they didn't do that. And I think I suggested before Discovery even premiered, I said, do a complete reboot of Star Trek. Everything old is new again. Don't work on a canonical Star Trek the same way that Mobile Suit Gundam, and I didn't use that as an example, but I use it because I like Mobile Suit Gundam. You have your Universal Century Gundam continuity, which I love. But then again, you've got all these other different continuities like Gundam Seed or Wing Gundam. They're totally different. And I think that you can still, and some of those shows are better than others, but like everyone loves Wing Gundam. In America, I think Wing Gundam might even be the most well-known. Maybe not now, but it was at one point. And it's not part of the original Gundam continuity. And Gundam has looked at different ways to do that, and I think Star Trek should do that as well. And honestly, I don't even think about Discovery in continuity or Picard in continuity with classic Trek, because it is so not that way. So I really appreciate that you said that, the bunk. I mean, unfortunately, this idea of canonical stuff, that's why I loved Ryan Coogler's Creed. You could say that Adonis Creed might be a little too young, but I don't mind playing fast and loose with a timeline, because it's kind of close, sort of. Adonis would be a little older than I might have thought Michael B. Jordan was, but it still kind of works. That kind of thing doesn't bother me. You can, within 10 years, I'm good. But I don't think Disney, if you were to ask like Bob Iger what canon is, he'd be like, well, what does it matter? They don't get it. Unless you're a real fan of this stuff. And by the way, the irony is that fans are poo-pooed. Like J.J. Abrams saying, I don't want anyone who's ever worked on Star Trek working on this show or working on this movie, except maybe John Eves, but I didn't realize he worked on Star Trek. I get that because they want to reinvent it and make it their own. Unfortunately, I don't know if they were necessarily up to the task. Omar94, Omar's writing in lots of letters, and I appreciate that. Hi, Rob. As much as people love Star Wars and The Godfather, there are problems with both series to me. Godfather 3 would probably have been better if Robert Duvall was in it, but he left after realizing Al Pacino would be paid 4 to 5 times more than he would. Yep, and you know what? One of the greatest miscarriages of cinematic justice is not paying Robert Duvall what he wanted, because the studio obviously didn't think he was as important. Tom Hagen is as important to the Godfather saga as Michael Corleone. And what Godfather 3 should have been about was about both of them battling for the soul of the family as they tried to take it legit. There's an earlier script with Michael and Tom as the focus, which was better than the final film. Really? I haven't read that. I'd like to read that. Francis Ford Coppola admitted the main reason Godfather didn't work was Duvall's absence. I think there's a lot in Godfather 3 that does work, though. Feeling the film is incomplete without him. Coppola also stated the film suffered from a lack of time for writing, as he wanted 6 months to work on the script, but Paramount gave him 6 weeks instead. It's true. With Star Wars, everyone knows the problem with the sequel trilogy was behind-these-scenes drama, so my issues are with Return of the Jedi and the prequels. Hey, you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. Return of the Jedi had great scenes and moments, but overall it didn't work for me. It didn't work for me either. It would have probably been better if Spielberg had directed it. George Lucas wanted Spielberg, but the DGA prevented that from happening. It's true. If he did make it, holy crap, it's Lucas, Spielberg, and Lawrence Kasdan, the trio behind Jedi. If they made something that good, then Return of the Jedi would have been truly epic. With the prequels, there are aspects of them that I like, but overall they don't work for me. They probably would have been better if directed by someone else. Lucas asked Ron Howard, Robert Zemeckis, and Spielberg, but they all said no, feeling it was too daunting of a task. You mentioned you liked the Phantom Menace script, so maybe with another director, the movie could have turned out better. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Well, Omar, I agree with you 100%. I think that the Star Wars prequels are bad movies, but good Star Wars. They tell a good Star Wars story. Unfortunately, they're just not that good. So yeah, and Godfather 3 should have been about Tom Hagen and Michael Corleone going at it. They should become enemies. Maybe not enemies, but battling for the soul of the Corleone family, which is great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to bring an end to this episode of Robservations, episode number 386. 386, ladies and gentlemen. 386, my God. I want to thank you all for being here. I very much appreciate the support of the channel through tips and super chats and all the letters you guys are writing. It's very important to me to have those letters coming in, to share them with you. Thanks for listening. And if I could recommend Don Winslow and all of his books, remember, it's funny, this is his new book, and every author, the Broken, that comes out next Tuesday. While I think this was great, and this is a great Don Winslow sampler, you might get more out of it if you've read his other books. And, I don't know if it's dated, because it is 21 years old. California Fire and Life is great. The Winter of Frankie Machine is great. But I think his and The Force, if you want to read an awesome book about corrupt cops, The Force is great. But also his magnum opus that is incredibly timely is his Cartel trilogy, beginning with Power of the Dog, followed up by The Cartel, followed up by The Border. And I highly recommend those books, so check those out. And it was cool that Don Winslow wrote that piece today in Deadline about the winner of Frankie Machine. I always wanted to know what happened. Now I heard it from the horse's mouth. So thank you, Mr. Winslow. And I also want to thank my moderating staff, beginning with Mayor Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa, who's been dealing with craziness. And, of course, I want to thank I was going to sneeze. Detective Jim Boyers, who would love Don Winslow's books, I think. And, of course, Greg Smith up in Olympia, Washington, building his 1-to-1 scale snowspeeder. And then, of course, Louis Yu and Jordy Lyons They make this, the Post-Geek Singularity, a great community to hang out in. So thank you to them. And I want to thank you all for still tuning in during these trying times. I hope everyone is staying safe and having a good time and at home and enjoying your family and friends. And if you want to be creative, absolutely, now's the time to do it. How often do you have this kind of time to do these kinds of things? So I think that is great. I want to remind everyone that Whining About Movies, episode number 12 tonight, where we talk about Federico Fellini's masterpiece, La Dolce Vita. We will be there. Elizabeth and I will be delightfully slightly inebriated, drinking wine. And I'm glad everybody likes Elizabeth, and she is quite delightful, and I love doing the show with her. So come in tonight, 8 o'clock, where we're going to talk about Federico Fellini's, I think La Dolce Vita is one of the great movies of all time. Also 8.5. I'm a big Fellini fan. So join us. I'll be back at 8 tonight. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say, as you know, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I bring Robservations, episode 186. By the way, I'm working on a barn burner for episode 400. I'm really thinking about being on for 8 hours. I'm not kidding. I was on for 5 hours for the 300th show, maybe 8 hours, because I think that'd be kind of a full work day. And if so, I will have certain interview packages and guests, both live and pre-recorded, and it should be quite interesting. So, 14 days away. Oh, Royce Freeman sending in a super chat. Hang on, Royce. Wait. I can't put my glasses back on. I'm a filmmaker like my father, and while I recognize the classic films, I like the films I grew up on, which he mostly doesn't. He says I should aspire to be better than those fluff films that I like. Oh, Royce, tell your dad, don't be a snob. I mean, look, I would say that the films of yore are more steeped in the theater, and literary tradition. So they tend to be, I think, perhaps better written, but the language of cinema has advanced. So the reverse is true in the sense that there are things that we're getting from a cinematography standpoint, just the language of film that has been terrific over the last, 30 or 40 years. I don't know. I mean, maybe you're young and I'm as old as your dad, but I would say that there's valuable things to find all over the place. I will say this. I do think that modern audiences who came of age in the 80s and 90s, if you were growing up as a film fan, I think the movies that, like for instance, I was 12 years old when I saw All That Jazz, Bob Fosse's All That Jazz. I was blown away. I don't think many 12-year-olds would happen to them today if they watched All That Jazz. But again, that's because culture changes and everything's different. So that, they don't have to be that way. But I would say that definitely your father, there are a lot of fluffy movies, and there's movies that don't have as much substance. I've always thought that movies back in the day were sort of very adult. I do feel that movies were more adult. Like you look at 70s films, they're dealing with a lot of adult subjects. But that's because, when the advent of technology came in and you had the Dijkstraflex camera and you could start doing motion control, and Star Wars was as successful as Star Wars was, things started to change, and the stories that we were able to tell, as my lights are flickering on and off, were just different. And so I think you both have valid points of view. You should pick your favorites. Like, show your dad something like Shawshank Redemption. I don't see how he could say that wasn't a good movie. That's not exactly a fluff movie. I'd be curious. What are examples? Ask your dad, what are the examples of the movies he likes and the movies you like? And do you not like the movies that he likes? I'd be curious. Tell me. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I bring an end to Robservations, episode number 386. As always, as I like to say, or maybe not, have a better day. Oh, Royce sends in another super chat. I'm 40. He is 70. Blade Runner is his favorite film, which I love, but he hates Tarantino. Okay. Wow. I could see that because, look, Tarantino is doing pastiches of movies that your dad already saw. Interesting that his favorite film is Blade Runner, but I can understand why. Look, Quentin Tarantino's movies are about movies. I don't necessarily know that they're about human truths. I think the closest he came, and I bet your dad probably likes, if you asked your dad what Quentin Tarantino movie he liked best, I'll bet it would be Jackie Brown. That's just a guess. But I think that was because, again, Tarantino is adapting another writer's work. And I think that makes it really interesting. Show him Jackie Brown if he hasn't seen it. See what he says about that. I bet he'll like it more. And with that, and by the way, thanks for supporting the channel, Royce. Appreciate it. And with that, I say, have a better day.